her user story was as a project manager, she had to do this one really menial manual task that she hated doing, and so do all the other project managers at DIQ. It's just part of, you know, setting up a new account, getting a client going, etc. Does anybody know where I should be pointing? Right here. Oh, this way. Okay.
Want some help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I can just look at it. Oh, because yeah, there's that.
Oh. I'll bring it back for you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Oh, no?
Oh, here. Go back. Try that one.
This one?
Yeah. This one. And then we just okay.
And then just let me, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, but it's not casting.
Yeah.
I stood.
I don't come down here often.
Can't have a tech event without technical.
Yeah.
Yeah, how about
You gotta
that?
share the whole screen.
Share the whole screen? Yeah, that's not it. We had it.
Reclaiming my time.
Yeah.
Had about like.
Oh, no.
We
Alright.
started early, so you're still good.
I'm gonna start this back
Okay.
and then I will share screen one.
Okay.
Where was it? Wasn't that fun? We saw it for a minute.
Here, let's see. Yep, so if you do share over here,
Which one?
That-
That's not it.
it's not the right one.
No, that's not
Okay,
it.
let's do a different.
All right. Share.
So share.
Do you see it on here?
All slides. No. Show
Right.
all windows.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Scroll down. There it is.
Sorry about that.
All right, and then present from current. Okay.
Okay, so then you're gonna click it? You got it?
Yes. Okay. I think we're
All
back.
right, sorry
Great.
about
Okay, so let's start from the beginning, right? Problem was someone doing a manual task that was really taking quite a bit of time from their day-to-day work, kind of the standard, problem statement. So it really all started with a really boring task that the team hates doing. Look, it's part of the job, but everyone hates doing it. But partly Google Drive is to blame, and here are the facts. As part of, we have a templated folder that we typically use for all of the decks and all of the presentations and workshops that we, carefully guide all of our clients through. But on the left-hand picture, as you can see, Google Drive lets you create a copy of an individual document. But anytime you go to create a copy of a directory, on the right-hand side, you can see the menu. That option is not there. And so to try to automate creation of documents, because we have, a directory schema and there's a bunch of stuff that we have to move over into client folders, it doesn't really let you do that. So we're doing, all this manual copying and setting up all of these client projects every time we land a new client. And Dataiku is a prosperous and growing company, so we get lots of new clients all of the time. So at first, it really felt like, oh my God, like there has to be a better way to do this. And so Lauren, she's our protagonist. She wondered if she's like, hey, maybe I can automate some of this using Google App Scripts to solve the problem. But big problem, she didn't know how to write a Google App Script. So she went and asked ChatGPT to see if it could help speed up the process. So she starts her query and saying, hey, ChatGPT, write me a Google App Script to copy a folder with subfolders from one folder on Google to another folder on Google Drive. And it's like, hey, here's some code. And she's like, oh, crap, this is actually really cool. So she gets some source code and starts plugging it into Google App Scripts. So things started out pretty well. She's like grooving with ChatGPT, but mistakes were made. A lot of them by ChatGPT, some by her. She's making some assumptions. And ChatGPT is actually a lovely conversationalist and, ended up apologizing quite a lot. So she would say, hey, this isn't quite right. you should check if the folder exists, and if it doesn't exist, can you create it? So then it, goes and it is aware of the conversation that you have been having with it. So it goes back and edits the script that it originally generated. And so as you can see here, it's like, oh, okay, now we're going to have a source folder ID variable, and then we're going to have a target folder ID variable. And then, it's kind of like grooving with her. Another really fun thing is that, like I said, Lauren at the time did not know, like she hadn't really scripted in Google Apps scripts. So she's kind of like learning along the way. So it's a great way for her to upskill as well. And then she's asking, hey, I'm getting an error that the file is not a shortcut, but why might that be happening? And it's saying, hey, you're getting an error file for like these reasons, right? So it's giving back documentation to her, stuff that would have maybe taken her quite a long time to search through native documentation for Google Apps scripts. But then it also told her she was wrong in some cases, which was definitely like a shocker, right? Because it was so nice before. She says, hey, when I run this, like if I click on the URL, this is what's happening. What could I be doing wrong? And it's saying, we interpreted this kind of passive aggressively from ChatGPT, and it's saying, it seems that you may have missed specifying the HTML file name. So like, hey, user, you made an error. But eventually they got the hang of it. They're working through it. They became unstoppable. And it actually did generate an application that is currently live and being used by our teams at Dataiku to automate a lot of their processes. The first iteration of the website looked like the top thing. And she's like, okay, I mean, no client's going to see this, but how about you make a beautiful website? And she really did say it like that, like, hey, can you make this a lot nicer? And that's what ChatGPT thinks is beautiful on the bottom, bottom one there, which is really great. So then she's like, well, can you update the HTML code so that it looks like a super professional and beautiful web page with a colorful background and a nice font? And it looks like she made an error here. If it could have a picture of the mountains, that would be ideal. And she's like, ChatGPT says, certainly, here's how you can update the HTML code to have a professional look with a background. And then in the end, everything works really nice. We actually do have, like I said, this is actively in production being used by our internal teams. And this is what it looks like. So the application is very simple. You specify the target folder of where you wanted to create all of these shortcuts of our templated folder. You tell it the target folder ID, which in Google Drive is just, it's like the last piece of text, in the URL. And then you give it a new customer name, right? Because this all started because anytime you're onboarding a customer, it's really hard to like do this. So you tell it a new customer name, Tech Rochester, and then you submit, and it actually does go and create all of the schemas and the infrastructure and all the folders and creates all of the, all the stuff. And then we just parameterize like in the file names and stuff like that so that it could, pull out like a customer name, and then it just says like Tech Rochester onboarding document or whatever, so it's really cool. So, all in all, it only took 71 questions of back and forth. That's it, really. That's it. That's the end. That's the fun story. And then remember that long user story at the beginning. You guessed it, ChatGPT wrote that with a simple input. Great. Thanks. Happy to answer also about how large language models are being used in the enterprise or how Dataiku can help. But this was a fun little story.
Anything on chat? Any questions in chat? Okay. Thank you. Our next panelist is Kendall Koenig.
Hi, I'm Kendall. I started out my career in tech, then kind of became an academic for a little while, did economics, law, and policy of tech, and net neutrality and some stuff. And these days I kind of volunteer with RockDev. I do the annual compensation survey and a couple other things and do some contract work here and there. But I thought I'd just talk about AI for a little while. I didn't bring slides, but just thought it would be kind of nice to have a conversation and about this all later too. But a lot of people have been, well, especially in the media, there's a lot of this breathless speculation, right? Like, are we gonna have this run on Areka servers and Skynet's going to pop out months later, right? And for those of us who are a little bit closer to technology, we know that's not realistic now, given what the large language models are like. But who knows in 20 years with the pace of things that are going. This thing about research, it can be unpredictable, right? But it's kind of fun as it is to speculate about what the consequences or what AI is going to be like in the 2040s, like just what already exists and what we've already seen demonstrated. It's really impressive, and it's going to have, I think it's going to be really consequential, right? So it seems like a fundamental breakthrough, a fundamental technology. And now we're going to see like a whole nother round of like applied technologies, right? Where everybody's going to try to figure out how can I take this really new, cool capabilities and apply them to a whole bunch of problems, automate a whole bunch of stuff. And so I'll bet a lot of people here have maybe kind of, just thought about that a little bit, like what are the problems that I could use this for? And you see all these kind of examples or speculation in the media, like can it do copywriting? Can it do question and answer, like as a substitute for Google search? So will it start impacting Google's business? One fact that blew me away was that it was able to pass the bar exam at the 90th percentile. As someone who studied for and passed the bar exam, it took years to do that. So, that's pretty damn impressive, right? So there may be regulatory reasons you don't want to let, give legal or medical advice, considering that it does hallucinate every so often.
Although LLMs are currently being trained in more domain-specific fields, I just saw BioGPT is currently being trained on like medical corpus to be able to give recommendations that are more specific to that field. So very cool stuff.
Yeah, or maybe we'll even use AIs to help create purpose-built AIs faster. It's this exponential growth, and it's not like the AI can do it by itself, but it's more about the AI system and the humans like working together, right? And actually is a really good segue into my next topic, which was because of all this automation, people have been thinking a lot about, is ChatGPT going to automate my job? Am I going to be out of a job? And I think a really interesting way to look at that, or the right way to look at that, is less ask the question like, can the computer replace everything that a human currently does, right? Because you can look at like the output of ChatGPT and you can say, well, this is impressive, but it made this mistake here, so I can't really replace a person. But the right kind of way to look at it, I think, is does it make a person working together with the AI more productive? So an example from the legal field, some of my former classmates, were looking for jobs and had kind of a hard time in the early 2010s or whatever. And one of the reasons was something called electronic discovery. So it used to be the case, and you had litigation between big companies, and they do these document dumps on each other during discovery, right? They'd have to hire a whole bunch of lawyers to like search through all those documents and find the needle in the haystack, so that would be relevant to their case. Well, you don't do that anymore. Now you can just upload it all into a search engine and run the search engine. And so now you don't need attorneys to do that anymore. And so you need to hire fewer attorneys. And so it doesn't necessarily need to replace everything a person does. Now, if you have the same number of people like chasing that are able to do more work, right? But you need fewer people to do that work, then it's just going to naturally impact employment in that area, even if you can't completely replace a person. So that's kind of interesting to think about, because there's a lot of kind of new and impressive areas where it's like it's starting to be able to automate stuff we didn't think that we'd be able to automate so quickly, or at least it is impressing me. I don't know about everybody else. But, I don't know, it's just really kind of interesting and something to think about. It just fits into the broader economic pattern too, of like bigger returns to capital, the rich get richer, the labor falls behind. It's just something for us all to just really stress out about for the next couple of years. I don't know, hopefully it works out for us, right? But then the last thing is just like, all of the opportunities that there are for misuse, for this technology in the wrong hands. If you thought the bots and spam were bad before, if you're able to generate content that, for most purposes, you can't tell whether it was written by a bot or a human just by looking at it. I mean, the problem that's going to have for like fake reviews or even like generating plausible looking academic papers or, fake discussion participants on social media, combine that with all the information people have about everyone through surveillance capitalism, and you can get some kind of scary futures there. And the most dramatic thing I saw recently was that someone had like a fake kidnapping scam where they called up some grandparents and were able to use AI to generate the voice of this granddaughter and made it sound like she was being kidnapped to extort someone. And the person was never actually kidnapped, right? And it's not like, bad people can't do bad things and haven't been able to do bad things for a long time, right? But new tools, being able to reach out across and do this new stuff across the internet is kind of scary. I think we're going to have to develop defenses for that, kind of defense against the dark arts or some of that content. I don't know exactly what that's going to be, but maybe there's some opportunities for that sort of thing in the future too. So, all right, I mean, that's probably 7 minutes.
Thank you for sticking to time, Kendall. That's very nice.
No
We
problem.
can take a question now if someone would like to. You bring up a lot of really interesting points. That everybody's hearing, all the fears, all the good, all the bad. Yeah, please.
I have more of a comment than a question. Kendall, I think you did bring up a lot of good points, and one of my fears is with technology, there's always good and then there's always opportunity to be bad. And you mentioned you might have to put some defenses in place. What's different to me about this technology, what can be scary, is the fact that anybody can touch this. You put AI, anybody can start accessing it, figuring out how to wire it up to anything, where other technologies in the past maybe had to have some physical materials or presence in order to do something, let's say, bad. So I am curious if anyone has ideas, what can be done from a defense perspective to help mitigate any potential issues and fears.
I had an idea.
Yeah.
On the sort of, you can't tell if you're speaking to the person you think you're speaking to. Sort of like a time-based one-time password kind of between people instead of just between you and Google or you.
Yeah.
Sort of like some sort of secret you can both figure out, but you have to establish those shared secrets for all your contacts.
Or maybe there may be some sort of web of trust. Maybe
Right.
we need to go back to that concept. I know people have tried to do that in the past. Kind of there's Twitter Blue or, verification, by some tech companies, but then again, that's also controlled by a central company. Maybe we can do something that's more distributed again with a web of trust, where at least we can get verified that someone is an actual human that we're talking to, instead of just some civil attack where someone is creating 100 million different AI accounts and you have no idea if you're talking to a human or a computer.
There is a funny Turing test right now that does actually work with ChatGPT, right? It's not context aware, so it has been trained on a large corpus of text, and it is really good at predicting responses and kind of in that natural language manner, but it lacks context awareness sometimes. So if you ask it something like, "What letter does this sentence end with?" you would know, right? H. ChatGPT can't tell you that. You have to feed it that sentence again for it to tell you, right? So
it doesn't think like a human that really
Right.
that reasons from first principles, and you can kind of figure that out if you talk to it. But again, maybe that's not the case in 5 or 10 years. Maybe you can
Right.
use the output of ChatGPT as the input to train a model that reasons from first principles. There's all sorts of innovation. People are seeing how successful this is, and they're going to try more things, and who knows exactly how fast it's going to go or what people are going to come up with. It's kind of both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
I think a lot of the stuff is really hard to predict, and you have, those old concepts from about the singularity that people have like, tossed out as woo-woo, but I think we might be in that place. And the singularity and event horizon, you can't predict what's past it. I think we're there. Even if it doesn't mean like some kind of a rise of AI, it could just mean that we can't predict what is going to be out there 6 months from now.
Yeah, other than the fake stuff. So we see a lot of, I used AI to do blood, I used AI to do blood. Is there something we can key in on as we're reading through, say, a piece of literature to identify its craft, right? So I used AI to identify the color and size of a bead. Well, we've been doing that for 20 years with vision systems. So what in there can, in a publication or somebody's write-up, can we key in on and say this is craft? I don't need to pay attention to it.
You have a question?
Yeah, what about copyright concerns? So
You can't copyright, actually. The Copyright Office came out and said you have to disclose it and you can't get copyright on anything created by an AI. They already did that.
I mean, I guess my question is broader than that because AI has to be trained on text and images. So there are already lawsuits going on. And also if AI generates images or I mean, the question is the program that was presented to you, was it created by some entity that would be able to claim copyright, or the picture that AI has presented to you, who you use as your background, was actually a copyrighted image? I mean, all of these are issues, so I don't know what your.
Kendall, do you have insight on that?
Sure, there's a lawsuit from Getty Images against Stable Diffusion, I think, is the current active suit. And, it's about, the rights of people that have content that go into those systems. Can Getty Images prevent people from making a system that's based on that stuff? And that's active litigation. I don't think we'll find out what happens with that for a while. There's also the issue of, when the AI generates something, who is responsible for what that AI generates? So is it possible to prompt the AI in a way that it will just reproduce a copyrighted art? And if so, who is responsible for that copyright infringement? Is it the company that developed the AI? Is it the person who prompted it? Are there, Section 230 maybe gets involved? But the same thing can be said for libel. So you could ask an AI system about someone and it could say something false and defamatory. It could say person X defrauds their employer or something, like per se defamation. Who's responsible for that now? Probably the AI company, or maybe someone else has kind of taken over liability by contract, but now it's not, they don't get Section 230 protection because it's not someone else that's the speaker, it's the AI company, there's the AI model that's the speaker.
Interesting.
So
I'd like to take a question from chat because it's good that we have the words going.
Before we go too long, we've only had 2 of the 4 go for their
This is true.
time, so can we hold off on some questions?
We can do that, so we'll save the chat.
Sorry for those on chat that I'm gonna cut it off there.
Sometimes it takes a while to get going, so I like the momentum. Well, keep the momentum going.
Okay.
Yeah, it's your turn.
I need the clicker thing. I have a thing. There it is. Yeah, if you want to make it full screen, please.
I do.
I have animations.
You have animations, here, miss.
Just do it quick. Okay, so I think this is actually a nice segue because I think there's a lot of stuff that people are talking about. So I'm going to maybe try to structure it and bring it back down to this is. I'll just. Hey, okay, great. My name is Max Irwin. I'm a bootstrap founder of a company called Max.io, based in Rochester, and I build AI software mostly around making it really fast and usable in a production setting or in a search setting. My background is in search technology, which is how I got started in AI. I've been doing search for about 12 years. And I fell into AI in about 2015, and I've just been working on it. And now I'm applying it to search and develop a product that I sell to customers who need awesome search stuff. I'm also co-contributing author of a book called AI Powered Search, that's published by Manning. It's coming out in the summer. And I just like to talk about this stuff all the time, so I was really happy when I got to speak on this panel. So I think it's important to just kind of go back to basics on some of these things for people who don't know, because we kind of just jumped in, right? So what is GPT? Everybody hears GPT. Generative pre-trained transformer. Generative. It makes stuff. It takes things and it makes images, text, whatever. In this concept, we're talking mostly about text. So I'm going to leave images aside for now. Pre-trained, this came up a little bit earlier. So it's trained on just massive amounts of data. You need to have a lot of data to have an effective model. And it's trained in such a way where it takes the data and then it wants to generate things. And how do you do that? It uses the architecture of a transformer. And the transformer takes information as output and it converts it, transforms it into a different output. So this is great for things like translation, translate this English to another language like Armenian. So the input is the English language, the output is another language. So that's a transformation. Write some code. So I'm going to describe some code in natural language, write some Python with Flask, do a lot of work. That's the input. The output is hopefully a working Python solution. Summarization. Give me the gist of the novel Great Expectations. So it's going to take the whole book and summarize it for me. Abstracted question answer. Why did Pitt, who's the main character in Great Expectations, why did Pitt move to London? So this is like a complex question from the book. So how can we answer this? So again, it takes information as input, transforms it to output based on the data that it's seen, the experiences it's been trained on, and the objective that it's been trained on is to generate the next token in a sequence. So what does that mean? Capabilities and limitations. It learns to predict the next token in a sequence based on data it has seen. So it's a token is like a particle. So just replace token with word. So it goes, generates words. And it's been trained on this objective, which is generate stuff based on what it's seen. This came up earlier as well. Models perform well for data that has been exposed to during training. So when you train a model, it's seen that, it's seen examples of that. And then it understands, okay, this is what I do in this situation. But new data can pose a problem. So typically, models don't perform well for new cases unless it's learning similar cases on the training data. We call this zero shot. If you're presented with a case or a piece of data that it's not familiar with, how well does it perform in a zero shot task? Okay, since GPT 3, 3.5, 4 have been trained on trillions of tokens from the internet. That's pretty much all the knowledge they can gather effectively that is of a reasonable quality. There are very few public cases that it hasn't seen, right? But this falls apart a little bit when you get into private or highly specialized domains where it hasn't seen the cases or the data before. So this is the capability and the limitation of GPT. And it's just a model. It doesn't think, it doesn't have motivation, doesn't have any human characteristics aside from this single objective of generating text. And then it's been further trained on other objectives and things like that. But just keep all those things in mind. Evaluation of a real world example. So we saw one from Melissa, that was awesome. Here's another one. I was like, okay, I gotta do my taxes, and I don't want to go through and label all of my expenses for the IRS. I'd like to see how GPT does at this task. So I have a prompt, and I say, would you classify the following expense from Form 1040, Schedule C, Part 2 expenses as office expense, utilities, deductible meals, or travel? Give it a prompt. So I've got a spreadsheet, all this stuff. There are 235 expenses for the year 2022. And I said, give me a response, and how well did it perform? So you can see on the right here, you can see that at all, how it actually did. This is a very small example. It took me about 10 minutes to label this myself and what I would have said. Somebody shouted a number. How well do you think it did compared to what I described independently to this data set?
75%.
How much?
75%.
75%. I gave this a 56%. It agreed with me. So 56% is terrible. Now this is, I could modify this. I could change the prompt. I could do some other things. But you can see some obvious errors. It thinks that my GitHub expense was a travel expense. That's nonsense. And then it says easy CGI. In one case, it says it's office, in another one, utility. The exact same text. So this unreliability. So it needs to improve. And this is a specialized domain, so this is an excellent example. So then I started thinking about subjectivity as well. So generative AI tasks are subjective, and therefore it's very difficult to evaluate. That task was easy. But if I'm doing a translation, well, did you translate to a formal or casual read for this case? So then you have subjectivity in translation. Code. Does this result in a nice user experience? Is it secure? Does it do things that are, well, in my intent? And that's subjective, right? Different people may get different answers. So again, it's difficult to evaluate. Summarization. Did the answer it gave me was too long, too short? Did it leave out, key pieces of information that I thought were critical as an expert? That's something important. Abstractive question answering. So this question, why did Pitt move to London? Are these the same motivations I would have given to Pitt? You told me why you thought Pitt moved to London. Maybe I think you moved to London for a different reason, based on my interpretation. So the problem with this is that as we train models and we improve models, we have to have like ground truth data. You have to know, well, this is better and this is worse. But once you add subjectivity, then it kind of falls apart. It becomes very difficult to evaluate and improve the model. So then I started going down the road of thinking about, well, we have self-driving cars, right? And I don't know if folks know this, but there's a certain level of autonomous driving that we see. Well, what about a fully autonomous car that's like level 5, where level 0 is fully manual? And I was thinking, well, we don't really have this for, I'll say artificial general intelligence. That subject hasn't come up yet. But we have this model. We want to apply the model in different situations. At what point does it become like, okay, this is like the crazy AI that is in your sci-fi nightmares, right? Versus, oh, this is a very nice basic utility. So level 1 is like, correct the grammar in this document. Doesn't need any other information. This is ChatGPT. It's a level 1. I'm calling it a level 1 AGI, right? The model handles the task alone based on the prompts. That's it. I'm going to call level 2 is, well, it takes in third-party sources of information, and then it uses that. So research a topic and write a paper with citations. So this is kind of like what Bing does right now, because Bing interfaces with GPT, you search, you get a list of results, take those results, puts it into the model, and you get a summarization of the results. So that's like a level 2. A level 3, now you have third parties on the output. So I had input third parties, and now I'm like, order pizza for me, please. Well, now it's got to know what kind of pizza I like, and maybe ask some questions, and then it has to go and integrate with a form for Grubhub or whatever, and then fill out the form and make sure my pizza arrives. And it has to do this successfully, or book a vacation, right? Something like that. Or you can get into a lot of complicated situations. So I think we're going to see like level 3 stuff really pop up this year. A lot of people are working on these types of things. Okay, so now we get to a little bit more interesting stuff. So level 4, buy me a house. Like I have a bank account, money, I want this house. You do all the stuff for me. I don't want to find an inspector and do all this stuff. Do it, right? Negotiate this contract. It's a very, very difficult task, right? So I call that a specific long-term goal with multiple third-party interactions with abstract motivation. So that's like a level 4 type. And then level 5 is an open long-term goal, unlimited third-party interactions with agency and complex reasoning, and it just operates alone. So I give it a purpose. Make more money for my company, which is kind of a scary thought. Or reduce global warming, which is an interesting thought. So go off and do your thing, artificial intelligence. And hopefully at the other end, we have better climates. Or not. So this is where we get into like the interaction type and the difficulty, where we have these levels. So I'm just going to quickly run through these. So we've got these first 3, and I drew a line because the interaction is purely digital. Everything it works with is in the digital realm. And I'm using a laptop and it's doing things through forms and the web, stuff like that. Easy, medium, hard, It's not easy to write software that looks at vacation. It's hard. So there's a lot of interaction and glue and stuff like that you have to get to work. Maybe it can code itself to do that. That would be interesting. Okay, so now we get to level 4, and level 5. So this is the interesting part. This is the interesting part because this is a social interaction. Now you have social interaction. We're working with people. So on the other end of this, it's not just some form it's filling, but now it actually has to go out and interface with emotional, intelligent people, many of them, and do interesting things and come out on the other end with, unscathed. And that's like really hard to do that stuff. So I think that I drew that line because I think that crossing that line is really where we're going to see the boundary of things going wrong or going right, and how well does it perform in these situations. And if you're negotiating a contract with me, and I find out that it's GPT on the other end, well, maybe I'll be subversive and try to manipulate the bot because I'm using tricks. Or you're going to buy a house, well, I'm going to try to get a better price. You're just a robot. You don't have motivations. You're just following whatever you're following. There's no human point to that. It doesn't have a desire. It doesn't have a goal aside from just this prompt that I gave. So that's where we're really going to see an interesting line.
Thank you, Max. Appreciate that.
That is really.
Sorry if I wanted to.
No, that's okay. Just hold your questions for Max.
Interesting.
I'm gonna give Paul a chance. I'll be good.
Okay.
To speak. Paul?
Okay, thanks everyone. My name is Paul Yaki. I am a CTO and co-founder of Data Cicada. And we are a technology company hosted right here in Mexico, and we're just down the hall, so I'd like to see you walk the hall sometime. And we specialize in bringing data science, machine learning, AI type technologies to scientists and engineers. It's really where our sweet spot is in the market. And we're currently on the cusp of launching and beta testing right now one of our products, which is at the heart of it uses AI type algorithms to generate new pieces of data and does things like keep human in the loop for verification and validation and understanding. So we're kind of at this real interesting intersection of AI is coming, it's generating, it's doing all these things, but there's this human need to feel like we're in control of everything that's going on. So love to talk more about that with any of you after if you're interested, but that's kind of where we stand right now with what we're doing at Data. When I first saw this pop up, I had been enthralled with ChatGPT since it launched. And it feels like forever ago. It was only really about 6 or 7 months ago. And I got really curious and have been kind of following it very closely on anything from the interwebs to LinkedIn to just talking with anyone who I can. My wife is quite tired of hearing me talk about ChatGPT all day long. Curious, just a poll, who's actually used it in here? Okay, so majority of people. And who's used things like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion or any of those image generators? Okay. So you can guess probably where this image came from. This was one from, I believe it was, this one was Stable Diffusion, and I asked it to generate an image of a robot working in an AI startup and giving high fives to everyone because everyone loves AI. And oh yeah, no watercolor style. So I didn't want to get any of those strange photo artifacts that then completely gives it away.
Too many.
Yeah, too many fingers, all those things. So one of the topics that I've been very heads down building and developing at my company is I just wanted to talk kind of give a perspective of kind of startup life, what it's like to be working in this space while ChatGPT is coming out. And in short, it's dizzying. There seems like there's new models and everything dropping all the time. Trying to decide where there's product market fit with, do I integrate this? All these things are kind of just a dizzying thing. At the same time, it's incredibly useful. I look at it as a valuable member of our team at this point. Which is different than saying I trust everything that agent is doing, but we use it as a huge productivity booster in the things that we do. So anything like Melissa was saying earlier about writing little utilities and pieces of code, we find huge value in basically being able to do that without having to necessarily go down and write at that level every time we want to do something different or new, or bring in a new technology. Now that leads to kind of a big question of, well, why should I trust exactly what this is doing? And the answer is I don't at this point. I basically verify and validate everything it does. And there's points where it definitely falls and fails flat on its face. And all of you who used it can probably have already encountered some of those things. So I guess you take anything away from what I have to say is always verify everything that these things are putting out, because they are just predicting the next token based on a lot of the junk that they've seen on the internet. An example of that is just a business example. We were having a call with someone who was a potential partner in our space, and they said, well, I haven't really spoken with you before, so I went out and did a little research on your company beforehand, and was curious if I could just run that by you. It said that you are located in California. And they just started rattling things off. You have like 50 employees, and you've got all these partnerships with all these major universities and companies. And I said, thank you. No, just kidding. We corrected it. But an example, they went out and actually used AutoGPT. Has anyone heard of that one? Yeah. And so kind of like what I think Max was saying, it's like it can have its own goals, sub goals. It tries to solve things. I haven't used that one personally because I'm a little wary of giving it my credit card to try to go out and solve problems for me at this point. But it's really interesting and kind of an interesting force multiplier, if you will, on our team, small teams. And so I think there's going to be kind of massive iterations and a lot of new tools coming out that are with these small teams that are able to do a lot more than they could previously, even 6 or 7 months ago, based on this. I'll keep moving. The other area that's been dominating my time and thoughts for the last 6 months has been in education. So I moonlight, this is startup life, I moonlight at RIT as an adjunct professor in the software engineering department. And I get to get kind of this firsthand feel of what students are thinking and how that looks like to them, especially graduating students, kind of what the job market looks like. And I'm sure all of you are aware of the recent tech layoffs and all that going on. And so there's kind of this kind of down feel about what's going on out there. And then also layer on, oh yeah, robots are coming to take my job and livelihood. It's real interesting. Even economists are saying things like, hey, AI is not necessarily this version going to take your job, but it's somebody who knows how to use it right now is the one you got to watch out for. And so a lot of students that I interact with are kind of taking that very pragmatic approach and being proactive and learning and adopting this and trying to figure out ways they can use it in what they're doing. Now, there's always the obvious, oh, they're going to cheat on essays and all this and cheat on tests. I don't necessarily think that's kind of the biggest issue at the moment. There's always going to be people who are going to do those negative things with a new tool. And there's also counter defenses, dark arts defenses in there that are, take the output from this and put it in there and see, if anyone's heard of turnitin.com, those types of things. That are releasing new models of verifications and stuff like that. But that's kind of that cat and mouse arms race that we're going to see for a long time. I think the real interesting question in the educational space is how this is going to look in 5 to 10 years in terms of personalization, customization of educational material to users. If anyone remembers like Khan Academy and YouTube videos and like things like that, how they you just have to find another person to explain something to you. Think of now ChatGPT powered version of that can customize and relate to your experiences, to your past, to your interests, and tell you and educate you on all these advanced topics just from these things. So it's hard to say where it's all going, but there's some really interesting questions in the educational space and kind of where all this is headed in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's all I wanted to introduce right now, but take questions.
Thank you for keeping to the 7 minutes. That's great. Can we take a question for Paul? Go ahead.
As a teacher at a university, colleges, it takes a while for them to adapt programs, to adapt classes, to get that content. With things changing this quickly, how do you think colleges will try to keep up? As the way people learn, the way people get information is constantly changing.
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I think right now it seems like professors are kind of largely responsible for their material. And so those that can adapt and bring in new tools and techniques and ideas and use this tool, there's some interesting papers out there, even providing prompts to teachers on how to, actually adapt what they're doing or provide, get ChatGPT to do exactly what you want for your domain. So I think we'll see more of that in the coming months and years as people catch up and try to find new ways to integrate this into the materials.
Okay, wonderful. Let's open it up to questions now and give some time to our virtual attendees. And you want to give a question? I'll read it out.
There's two of them.
It's not to any one particular person, but to the whole panel, right? As this process grows over time, what are some limiting parameters being used to reduce the strong likelihood of the AI's intelligence growth?
There are a couple arguments there. One of them is that maybe you don't have to try to limit, because we talked about data requirements, right? All of the world's information. Well, maybe it's gonna, some people are saying maybe it's gonna run out of information because it has a lot. So that is kind of a limiting factor in a way, where it's consumed everything it can. And then, maybe it gets better at doing what it does with the information that it has. But learning new things can be challenging. And a lot of people are working on this problem with like keeping up with everything, because right now to train a model, it's like an offline task. Take the model, you have to train it, do it offline, and then you play it. There's a limiting factor there. The other thing is regulation. So Emily, we were talking about this a little bit, but in the United States it's very different, as we know. But we see in Europe, they're kind of at the forefront of regulatory stuff in these matters. So maybe Europe will kind of lead the way in some of the regulation. We saw Italy banning ChatGPT until they cleaned up some of the privacy stuff that was going on. And I think some of the lawsuits about copyright and things like that, maybe that's taking more of a front seat in Europe. Maybe we'll follow along, maybe not. But I think the hard part is that it's available, it's open, so now anybody can just take the technology and with a little bit of money, work at it, at their own pace. So, sitting at home on your own machine, you don't necessarily have to follow regulations. So limiting factors is quite hard.
I think a big limiting factor is just what people are able to come up with. It's kind of like, people don't know how to do it yet, right? People are going to try a whole bunch of different things, and it's hard to stop people from doing things, from trying things once that genie's out of the bottle. And it's even if it's you have regulations in the United States, does everyone follow them? Do people abroad follow the same things? Those regulations, you have a competition between companies and even between countries for AI dominance. Just because of the wealth and power that would come from developing advanced AI, there's huge incentives to do it. So I don't know that there are really breaks other than just it's going to take a while to get there. I mean, people would like to go faster if they could.
Great. All right. Second question. Well, there's two more. Okay.
Good, yeah. Want me to read it?
If you provide example data, is it secure? And who then owns the data?
Great question. And one of the massive limitations that we're seeing of use of some of these LLMs in industry. So within the enterprise context, a lot of the hesitation comes from being able to use these open source tools, right? So let me take a second to step back and really talk a little bit about how they can be used within the enterprise. So there's really two main ways to interact with GPT models. So there's using the API functionality that is offered by, say, OpenAI's Open API. You can pay for the use. And once that data, that input data, that query is sent to them, you are releasing, your data to them. They are able to collect it, use it for whatever they want. The second way to use large language models is to, take a version of it, an open source version of one. Hugging Face has plenty of options if you wanted to mess around with your own, and then host that in your either private cloud network. I saw there's some versions that you can operate off of a single laptop. The data privacy issues don't really matter there, right? It's a controlled infrastructure where that can happen. But we are seeing a lot of hesitation from industry about using, this type of technology because it's unclear, and already, the FSI space is really already so heavily bound by regulation to use AI, period, right? Like even really simple white box models to make decisions, because it's really difficult to say, hey, what was your rationale for making this decision, even with really simple algorithmic choices, much less something like ChatGPT, which was trained in a black box and can't really make inference on how it made a decision. So we are seeing a lot of those limitations in industry for sure.
Nice. Thank you.
Want to take one from the room?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there someone
One from the room?
I'll throw it out there. What do you think about ChatGPT? A lot of ChatGPT robots are just they're just generating text based on what they want to be false text to feed the internet with false data. They'll drive all the other ChatGPT robots to not actually be as correct anymore.
Well, that's a really interesting and kind of fun scenario, isn't it? Like someone generating a whole bunch of fake data or adversarial data.
Using ChatGPT, they can do it automatically. They don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
scripts, and it's just going to populate and flood things, and they can strategically target stuff.
Yeah.
That makes how do we know any day is good? How do we know any day is going to be good in the future?
That's a really good point. And just another story along those lines. Has anybody heard of the Microsoft K, the chatbot? Yeah, so this is an early version of the chatbot Microsoft released on Twitter, and a bunch of 4chaners and neo-Nazis got a hold of it, and let's just say they had to shut it down after a while because they thought it's stuff that they didn't want it to say, right? It's a problem.
People again, we all talk about like everyone's gonna do it, like be a good citizen about it. We're gonna use this for this, but there's more people out there that want to do it.
Yeah.
That don't believe in that.
Yeah, exactly.
When you get the reality, you can't be naive that everybody's going to use.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be. I mean, but the people who are want to do really bad stuff, there's that. But there's also like who's going to try to manipulate it, like people manipulate search engine optimization. It'll be a whole industry.
I think it'll put some more value on these kind of curated data sets that are kind of more, they've been reviewed in some capacity or been locked down, or they have some oversight over them. And you're even seeing in the industry, some of these language models are already being trained on these. There's supposedly even richer data sets and sources out there. If you were to, like I think Melissa was saying about the medical space, training just on medical records, or I forgot which financial institution was already released and was using one, Bloomberg. Yeah, thank you. That was specialized just on their data.
What's your feeling on the 6-month moratorium that got tossed out there in that letter from supposedly people that know what's going on, right? What's your thoughts about that?
I think it's obvious that nobody's following.
That lasts like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's one of those genies out of the bottle kind of thing that, we've seen that happen before with other technology, like nuclear power and things like that back in the day, that, once it's out there, you can't really put it back. The world kind of has to evolve and catch up and try to figure out ways to live with it.
The term Luddite comes to mind.
Well,
It's not gonna stop it.
Right, and I think this is, startups and technology doing what it does best, moving fast and breaking things, and then it's up to our regulators to ensure that we're able to catch up and provide the right parameters that don't stifle innovation, but still provide protections for those of us
Ken's a pretty tall.
I don't know.
Sounds like fiction to me.
I was wondering what each of your perspectives were on publicly traded companies that are leading in this space. Who are they? From your perspectives, what you've been following. Entities with deep pockets, I guess, the financial institutions are going big time. I'm sure DARPA and government is probably going, big time on this. Is a huge opportunity for them.
Well, the obvious one would be OpenAI. I think Microsoft owns a big part of that. Google is in the room stuff. I think generally speaking, the higher the investment in creating models like this, so the research that goes into it, the big data sets, the huge amounts of compute, the more expensive it is to create models like this, the more you're going to see concentration in a small number of firms. So I guess my gut is that the companies that are already big, have a lot of access to data and capital and technology already, are going to do very well. And there's a second tier of companies that are going to be able to kind of apply that stuff downstream, but the main kind of leading edge is just going to be in the kind of central dominant players.
I mean, this is, Max, I'm thinking your company, you said we try to create domains, specific domains or specialized.
Yeah,
domains.
so I work with companies to do domain-specific training, but just on their data sets, so enclosed, similar to what this is. There's an interesting push because there's publicly traded companies with money, and then there's a lot of venture capital that's out there for companies that aren't publicly traded but are starting up and doing this openly. So one of the big companies there is Hugging Face. Their mission is to democratize AI. So they have public models, and then there are other interesting organizations that come together as kind of like loose coalitions. So I'm going to mispronounce this, Eleuther AI. They are responsible for releasing a data set called Pile, which is a big data set, and then they've been training their own GPT models on this data, and they make the model weights publicly available. There's another smaller startup that just came about recently called Together XYZ, and they're training their own capable models and opening them up for anybody to use. So there's publicly traded, there's like the big money behind this stuff. And I think we can't leave out Meta or Facebook, as I still call them Facebook. And they released a non-commercial model called Llama. That's people are using it. They kind of got it out in the open, even though it wasn't supposed to. They say it wasn't supposed to, but a lot of people are using this model, and you can host it on your own machine and use it. It's a little slow, but it shows parity and capability with the OpenAI ChatGPT right now. Not GPT-4, but GPT 3.5. It's kind of equivalent in the way it behaves. So I think this raises an interesting question of, does anybody really control the technology anymore if it's open, and do public companies really control this? I think to an extent, but it's available, and now we're seeing it available on machines that you don't have to have a big data center with a lot of GPUs to run these things. So I think that's really the tipping point of this technology really taking off and doing far more interesting things that we can imagine in this room, because people are just kind of proving and using and trying all kinds of different stuff.
We have another 15 minutes available for open questions, so I'm just going to turn our attention virtually for a second. Can you comment on the ethics? Will there be regulatory panels to ensure there's no bias through communities? Or will these databases be generated that are now more like specific for New York Post versus New York Times readers?
I don't know what the second part of that question means, but the first part about bias being baked into models, that's definitely a problem. Yeah. Because I think a couple other people have mentioned that the way that these models make decisions can be black boxes sometimes. You don't really have a lot of visibility into why the models make the decisions that they do, and if you can be a garbage in, garbage out situation. So like if you input a whole bunch of data and that data was generated through a process that would say racist, your model might come up with generate a model that's going to come up with racist outcomes. And that's definitely a problem. I don't know that there's an easy way to solve that, or that regulators will be able to do that very well, but I mean, it's definitely something people are thinking about and worried about.
Thinking about it and they're worried about it now, but we're still very much in the infancy, so not sure where any of it goes.
I think the New York Post versus New York Times was a veiled reference to the idea of the Democrat versus the Republican conservative sort of split of views. And then we end up with models that are, you know, inherently biased and then well accepted by one camp, but not the other. And then will there be models that the other camp accepts? You know.
I'd like to pose a counter question. Is that any worse than what's happening right now? Serious, right? Serious. Like, yep, it's pretty bad. So if you use a tool to automate your hateful text, then I guess you can produce the hate faster, but it's still, you know, it's kind of happening. It's upsetting.
Maybe we should worry if there is only one voice, right?
Right.
Well, and this, you know, if you're in the space, you know, right, you said it, garbage in, garbage out. So you know to be hesitant or wary of its responses because you know that it's making predictions based on the data that it's seen. But not everybody knows that, right? And this really highlights the importance of data literacy going into the next 5, 10, 15 X years, and the importance of understanding this type of technology, even at a high level, just how does it work generally?
Melissa, for those of us.
And we've seen what a shit show that is for the last 5 years as far as data literacy goes. Right?
Can you, for everyone else in the room, can you kind of just explain a little bit more about data literacy and what it means for the definition, because we all might have different ideas.
Sure. Data literacy, I mean, that's an open-ended question, but it can mean anything, in the enterprise context, right? I'm always gonna bring that enterprise lens, but in the enterprise context, even just understanding how data could be manipulated to come up with a model that can predict something that generates new revenue for your organization. In the day-to-day context, it can mean just general understanding of how does this stuff work? What does training mean? Kind of picking up some of that common language that we are seeing being used in day-to-day, right? We're in a panel talking about large language models and natural language processing. Even when I was in grad school, not that long ago, that was like such a niche, highly specified thing. And now, we have parents, grandparents, everyone using this type of technology. So really making a concerted effort to at least understand the language, the vernacular that is being used around these topics. You don't have to know how these things are trained, right? But just being able to have a casual conversation around them.
Paul, do you have something to add in the question too?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in general, I feel like society's kind of only recently caught up in kind of just general internet literacy and like being aware of connections and awareness on how to conduct yourself online, for better or for worse. Society's just kind of gotten there, like with these newer generations, people who are kind of just reaching college, they've grown up with it, it's been baked into their life, their entire life. And then we're also have segments of society who grew up without it and don't even use it still. And so the pace of, I guess, just which this is accelerating for someone who's maybe just coming online, and now there's a imaginary being that's communicating with them and deceiving them at the same time, is real interesting how that's going to play out. I think, not to be like fear mongering, but what is in store for the next 5, 10 years in that regard, as society is still trying to catch up, and that data literacy, the internet literacy, technology literacy is still percolating through the system. This is just adding more of that people have to kind of catch up with.
What about liability? You feel like producing these engines that people start using for something that's somewhat real or believe them. where do you see liability, if people are gonna sue these companies for these engines, is it a free, is it a well, where do you see liability? Is it, or is it, there is none?
Probably entirely disclaimed through the end user license agreement, it's like.
It's on
that
the
nobody
you said.
reads.
They've only gone so far.
Yeah.
Bad hacking, the courts are against, well, all right, it's still, it's not gonna absolve them from everything exactly either.
Yeah, that's possible too, but it's hard to predict that sort of stuff, like before it happens, just because of the way that the law works in that sense. They wait for something to happen and then have like a case based on precedents, and that's how the law gets kind of made when there's no actual law around the system, but.
Well, are companies, or I guess the companies are they worried, are they consciously worried about it? Are they hesitant to do stuff based on that, or is that, we're not there yet?
I have heard on a podcast of lawyers discussing this, that there are terms in the EULAs that basically, like, if you are using the ChatGPT API and you use it to do something bad, it's like, ChatGPT, like, it's trying to not be liable, and they're gonna make the users liable and the people that are kind of standing in between them and the users liable. Or they're gonna try that anyway, in the EULA.
Are we pretty much at the end?
We still have time for more questions. Did you
Oh,
have-
okay.
you had one
I had a
too, right?
closing.
Oh, okay, yeah, please.
Noah's mentioned a little bit about employment, and that's something that I hear about a lot, is people being afraid that AI is going to steal their jobs. And obviously, like some of you have mentioned, it's not maybe there yet, but is that a real fear for people? And does this become something where the people at the top really are making all the money and everyone in the middle kind of gets displaced because there's no room for them in their jobs? And it's kind of like, we still need menial labor and we have these high level people, the people in the middle kind of are out of luck.
You described current state America.
I guess more so. Like, does that gap just expand even more with this because companies will need less people to do the same jobs?
Talk about this because I've been thinking about this a lot. We all have, for sure. I think certain classes of jobs, or we're going to see a lot less job opportunities at first. So it may not result in immediate like massive layoffs, but I think maybe positions won't be opening for certain jobs that can, somebody who already works at the company can now use to double their productivity, and then that position is no longer required. I think at some point we'll start seeing diminished employment in certain areas where it's easy to kind of have one person do a whole bunch of things all by Zoom. One thing that I think is really interesting, because I'm going to say my job is this, because I work purely digitally in the digital world, and everything digital, I think people have to kind of say, well, can I be replaced? Maybe, maybe not, but one really interesting thing that I think we're going to see, that came up in a conversation that I had earlier with somebody today, is I think we're going to see more people, and we call them the menial jobs, but I think we're going to see more like trades jobs. Like, well, State Street has been under construction for like 3 years because they're having trouble finding people to do the work, and that there's all these problems like with infrastructure falling apart, and you can't find plumbers to do your stuff, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to say, well, I'm just gonna put down my screen and maybe I'll get an apprenticeship and I'll start doing, it's interesting because as a child, we all thought, oh, the robots are gonna come and replace all the manual labor, and then we're gonna be left to just like writing poetry on our, whatever. It's like the complete opposite of that, which is totally fascinating. So I think we're gonna actually see more people saying, well, I'm not gonna go get a degree in computer science. Maybe I'm gonna go instead work and try to get work as an electrician, have an apprenticeship there. So I think that anybody who's, maybe all your students in this situation, maybe they're starting to ask these questions as well. So I think that we might see a shift. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we just have too many people like typing stuff. That, I don't want to say it doesn't mean anything or doesn't matter, but in the grand scheme of things, like, okay, well, if a tool can do this, is there any point in me doing it as well? And maybe I'll leave it to the tool and I'll find something more purposeful.
I'd like to offer a counterpoint or
Please do.
perhaps a different perspective. So again, sorry, this is kind of annoying, but I do have like, right, I'm not thinking about it from like a societal, perspective. I'm very hyper focused on how this type of technology gets used, in industry. Our focus is Forbes Global 2K organizations, some of the world's largest organizations, using AI to increase their profits, solve really hard use cases using AI. And the core tenet of being able to use ChatGPT or any LLM is knowing how to ask a good question. And what I see day in and day out is just businesses unable to formulate a good question. And so people who are industry experts, having a niche, having domain expertise, those jobs will continue to thrive. I mean, the technology is incredibly amazing. It's so powerful, but if you can't ask it a good question, it's not a genius. It doesn't know. It just is responding to how well of a question you can formulate. And day in and day out, I lead workshops helping some of the world's largest brands formulate those questions because they don't know how to do it themselves. It's confusing, it's anxiety inducing. They don't know how to use AI in the enterprise and stuff like that. So I think from a societal perspective, yeah, I mean, things like copywriters. Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing product descriptions being generated using ChatGPT, but from a business application, I'm gonna say it's gonna take a while for sure. Getting those business users on the ground floor to know how to formulate a good question to actually get a tangible result out of this technology is really difficult.
I was gonna add that we've all heard how important critical thinking skills are for the last decade.
Yeah.
And this is an extension above that. It's learning how to ask the question properly,
right,
so that you can get a great result.
Yeah. And even so, with the results that you are getting, they do have to be verified by a human who does know the answer. Because ChatGPT will very confidently tell you, yes, in order to create a pivot table or whatever, you should do this. So you do need someone who knows that the answer is correct in order to verify. So again, going back to that specific domain expertise, that niche business knowledge, and ensuring that you are keeping those folks employed, because those are the people who are going to use the technology to augment labor, augment productivity.
I had one example I wanted to mention to the group here, our hiking club.
Yeah.
In the Genesee Valley Hiking Club.
Mm-hmm.
We publish a quarterly newsletter, and our president just kicked out the latest newsletter. 2 out of the 4 articles in there were attributed to ChatGPT.
Oh, wow.
One on tick infestation in upstate New York, and the dangers, for hiking in an area infested with ticks. All came from ChatGPT. We just specified I need a 2-page article.
Yep.
Out it popped.
Yeah, out of curiosity, did you learn any new information, or was it?
I picked up a couple of things.
Oh, okay. It wasn't just a rearranged regurgitated bunch of that.
It was a
great.
good general overview on
Yeah.
how to avoid getting bit by a tick.
So some of that summary functionality that we heard Max talk about, right?
I did something similar in my own company with an internal newsletter. I took an actual article.
Yeah.
And then I asked ChatGPT in a specific way to generate something similar and just put it out there and say, can you guess which one was, human generated and which one was ChatGPT? We're still collecting the results. Okay, so if we could ask each of our panelists just to give a 3-minute summary, and then we'll conclude with whoever's live to do some networking if you wish to stay. We do have a hard shutdown here at about 8:15 before, the elevators aren't going to take you back up and down. So our panelists, Paul, you want to kick it off and we'll go down the line?
Sure. Well, I just want to thank everyone, Tech Rochester, for having us here today. Thanks for hosting us. I think we're at a real interesting point in time with this technology. I never thought I would see something like this kind of rapid advancement that like other generations have seen previously. With I referenced nuclear technology kind of taking off, or birth of the internet, and then lo and behold, we're starting to see the inkling of birth of AI kind of right in front of us. So I think we're inherently not good at predicting where things will go as far as technology, mix of technology, society, law. You hear both ends from optimism to pessimism. Usually it ends up somewhere in between. And so I guess I encourage all of you to stay in the loop and knowledgeable of what's going on, and try to spread the good word of what AI models and large language models and all that are about, and try to educate everyone we know. I certainly have been polling everyone. It's not just my wife. I'm annoyed in my family 6 months, but trying to get everyone to try out ChatGPT and be aware of it and kind of its limitations and what it can bring to what you're doing. I've talked to anyone from lawyers to marketers to regulatory compliance people, and they've all, some have not used it but have heard of it. There's hesitancy to engage with it in some people, and so I encourage everyone to kind of go out there and try to make everyone aware at least what's out there.
Yeah, thanks, Judy and Tim, for organizing this. It's great to be here. It's great to see everybody. I mean, I was at a conference last week in person, and now I'm here, and it's like, I like that we're doing more human things. I know this is a talk about AI, but I think that we've been like in this bubble, and it's great to get out of the bubble and go and meet people, because machines can't replace this, right? So this is awesome. And kind of similar to what a couple of people have said, like, you can approach this, I think everybody should approach this technology and play around with it and understand its limitations. We're kind of in this hype cycle. If you're familiar with the hype cycle, a lot of people are at the peak of expectations. I'm kind of not in the trough of disillusionment. I'm a little bit ahead of that. I'm trying to, I'm seeing where, you know, the actual productivity is with these models. I personally work in, you know, search technology, like factual information. The generative stuff I use for my own personal tooling and stuff like that, I build utilities. But I focus on facts, on finding real information that's ground truth and is verifiable. And I think that we're going to stick with that for a while. I think a lot of people are going to see the limitations over time, and certain aspects of our lives are going to change, but not in crazy significant ways right now, unless, you know, you work as a copywriter. Unfortunately, some things are unavoidable. But don't stop learning. As a software engineer, my whole life is learning, and I've had to reinvent myself several times. So just constantly staying ahead of the game, as a lot of people in this room probably know. Being in software is the most rapidly changing field that we've ever devised as a species. So keep learning, stay on top of it, stay in front of it, and do more human things if you start freaking out.
I'll echo what the previous panelists have said. Thanks to our hosts and everybody for coming out. Obviously, this has been really fun. I think it's easy to maybe overestimate a little bit what's possible, given that we're kind of at the top of the hype cycle. That definitely seems like an apt description. But at the same time, what might happen 5 or 10 or 15 years from now is also kind of exciting to think about. And we live in interesting times.
And likewise, thank you so much to our hosts. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to be with us here today. And thank you to our panelists. It's been lovely, you know, sharing this long table with you all. Yeah, I kind of, as my closing thoughts, again, that perspective of how some of this technology is used in industry, you know, just as a reminder, like, really in industry, which tends to lag a little bit behind for adopting some of this newer technology. Really what we're seeing is ChatGPT is just a model, right? It's a really pretty impressive, groundbreaking technology. But from an industry perspective and from that enterprise perspective, that model can't do anything on its own. It needs the business context. And so the business knows its needs, the technology knows what it's capable, and that's really the only way to democratize access to AI and within an enterprise context. And even then, it's just like, you formulated a question. How do you actually leverage all of that data that we've heard for decades about data being a new currency for organizations, how do you actually then leverage that, right? It's knowing how to do basic data literacy things like data preparation, data cleaning, these tasks and things that have become so important over the past decade. But then lastly, once you are past the data preparation and data cleaning phase, having that layer of governance, so the AI governance piece, and ensuring that within your organization, that you have folks who know what technology can be mapped to what data sets or what types of data problems. And that's really important. Those are kind of the three major pillars that we're thinking about from the enterprise perspective. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You'll notice we want to get better, right? As we go along, please take a moment, use that QR code and complete the very quick survey and give us some feedback. What worked well tonight, what didn't work well, and well, it's just very helpful for us to do it. So thank you. Stick around, we've got 10 minutes or so to network if you like. And thanks for being here. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Okay, whole panel, I'm gonna be
So I. You sent. Yeah.
That was you.
Oh my goodness.
So you're
She actually dresses here.
Judy, can I get a picture with you?
Judy, Judy's like, don't post. Yeah.
We wait out, right? You can look there first. I'm listening to all.
Didn't get a good. I'll come to that.
Yeah.
30%.
Cost over.
Okay.
Now the people are like, now I get all this degree, and now I might not have a job to pay for that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Kind of like now, everyone's, well, like, I'm all hiring. Can't find, so.
Yeah, my God, forever.